Welcome to Go Solo Live.
Don't you mean go solo live? Have you ever been asked why on earth would you travel alone? Go Solo Live not only answers that question, but celebrates life as a midlife solo traveler. This is a safe place for women to come together to reminisce about their travels, encourage others to travel, and to dig into the real lessons learned from these journeys. Now join Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel as she and her guests share stories of the solo travelers of midlife women.
Hello, sisters, and welcome to Go Solo Live. This is Jennifer Buchholz with Transform Via Travel. It's time to grab a cup of coffee and sit back and enjoy my conversation with Lisa England as she shares about her solo travels. She piggybacks them on business trips, for conferences, as well as her trip to Nepal. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, Jennifer. It's so good to be here.
Thank you for taking the time to share your stories with us today.
Absolutely.
So I'm not one for chit-chat. I want to dive right in.
Sounds good to me.
Tell me a little bit about what was going on in your life as this solo travel journey was going on for you. And I know you've done it more than once, so you get to pick the starting point, not me.
Well, I'm a storyteller, so I like to go back to the beginning. And I think the very first solo trip that I took when I was 19 years old, I think, if I'm doing the math right, 19 or 20, I got on a plane in Madison, Wisconsin. It was either Madison or Milwaukee, I think it was Madison, and flew halfway around the world to Nepal. And the country was in the middle of the Civil War at that time. And I wasn't even sure that the streets were going to be open and anyone was going to be able to come pick me up when I arrived. And I even had my parents' blessing to do this, which is pretty surprising now that I look back on it. So that was my introduction to solo travel.
How old were you at that time?
19 or 20.
Okay. So you dove right in.
I did. I said, I want to do this. I've wanted to do this all of my life, and I'm not going to let a war and not having a travel partner stop me from doing it.
Fantastic. So give us a couple of the highlights from that trip, and then I'm going to ask for the lowlights as well. So if you want to intermix those, feel free.
Sure. I worked at an orphanage in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. And for those who aren't familiar with Nepal, it's a tiny little country sandwiched between India and China, which is always an interesting place to be geographically. And the Mount Everest is there. So the tallest mountain, in the world is there. And there's quite a lot of mountains. The Himalayas kind of run through the entire country. And I was in this little valley called the Kathmandu Valley, worked in an orphanage there. That was definitely a highlight. Loved the kids. They were amazing. I got to meeting the people there was just really incredible. They live a very different life than we do. Nepal is like the second or third poorest country in the world. So very different perspective on life, on relationships, on what really matters. And I think it helped me to get out of my Western perspective and to live with people who really do focus on the day-to-day details of their lives, because there really is no future for a lot of them to think about in the same way that there is here. And that's, I think that was one of the most beautiful things about that trip, is it forced me to live in the now.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about what some of those lowlights were then, Lisa.
I think the lowlights sort of go along with the highlights. Meeting amazing people who I knew that I was going to get on a plane and fly halfway around the world from again. And I had no ability to really change their situation long term. That was a heavy thing for a girl of that age, and a very idealistic girl at that, to deal with. And also, I think being sick, of course, it's hard to live in a country like that. And you're just not used to what's in the water, what's in the food. It's hard to get away with being there for any length of time and not get sick. And I was there for several months. I did get sick several times. Spent some time in a Nepalese hospital, and not in a hospital that was used to having Americans. So it wasn't one of the fancier hospitals. It was really eye-opening, and a few of those medicinal experiences, shall we say, I would not necessarily repeat.
Wow. Okay, so let's take that for a second. That was also at least 10 years ago.
Yes.
So when you're talking to someone who's listening and they're in a different place, do you have any tips for how to manage, because you're young, no parents, not really speaking the language, and you're in a hospital that's not used to treating Americans?
Yes.
How did you do this?
A couple of things. I will say, I mean, there was some amount of English spoken in the hospital, so that helped. So I think the first thing is to do when you go into that environment is to scan it for an advocate, someone who recognizes enough about your culture or your language, or seems like they want to help you, or is empathetic in some way, and really like rely on that person, or try to form enough of a connection that you can get some help from them. In my case, the doctor, for whatever reason, I don't know why he was working in that hospital, but the doctor had lived in the US at one time. And so he spoke English, and he knew enough to understand what was happening to me. And he pretty much, whereas here a doctor would just run in and run out, sort of, and you'd have 5 other people who you touch essentially over the course of that visit. I was able to pretty much get everything I needed from him. And he said, now go to the pharmacy. They're going to give you this. It's going to look like this. It's not going to taste good. It's not going to be like what you're used to. He was able to be that advocate. And so you can look for that person and really, squeeze as much knowledge out of them as possible. You'll save yourself some headaches.
What a wonderful piece of advice is to have that advocate, and the fact that he took your hands like that. It does make me think, though, like just that very difference of how different medicine is in other countries. Yes. And it takes me back to Mary Poppins with the spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. That was real. Like in America, we're used to having somewhat decent tasting medicine because otherwise it won't sell.
Yes. That is very true.
It's funny when you just, like, I love to take a step back and stop and think, okay, so this is the situation and this is their normal. How is it different from our normal and why? And you get just perspective. Like, we're spending money to flavor our medicine so people will take it.
That is absolutely correct. And I can tell you that what it tastes like when it's made with all the right ingredients, but not a lot of the flavor, is certainly not very exciting, but it does the job. And I think, I feel like medical care there was just, it didn't have a lot of frills. And that's what made it feel scary, because we are used to having, nicely painted walls, and there's sugar in the medicine, and that, there's things to make the experience a little less harsh. They, weren't necessarily on that same page. And so
Sure.
If you stayed in the hospital, your family had to come feed you, versus here where there's like round the clock care. A lot of these little, what we would consider like luxuries or niceties of just, making someone feel comfortable. The point was to get better. The point was not to feel comfortable. And of course, in our Western perspective, we might say, well, if you don't feel comfortable, you're not going to get better. But it was just a different way of looking, at how to deliver the care and to keep the cost down, because patients were paying on their own for the most part.
Wow.
Yeah.
Again, and especially in my view, from a political view, I feel that our healthcare system and insurance companies rule our world.
Yes.
And so I love to take a step back. It's just a topic that fascinates me, and countries with socialized medicine and just seeing how that works. And there's always a cost.
Yes.
Like, this isn't like, oh, we should just do what they do because, no, there's a cost. We don't always look at that. So to see how that plays is fascinating. Thank you. And I'm sorry you got sick so many times.
Well, it's not unusual. I didn't help the situation in that I dove right in to the culture, and really wanted to become a part of the lives and the families that I was, encountering. And so that meant if people wanted to eat somewhere and they wanted me to eat with them, I would go, regardless of whether or not the doctor thought it was a good place for an American to go eat with an American stomach, right? That is not used to many of the germs and things that you would encounter there. So that's part of the reason why I was sick so much. And several of my friends who lived there a long time said that they had taken the same approach, and it had taken them about 18 months. And then they could pretty much eat and drink whatever they wanted after that, because they had made their way through all of the basic bugs. Most people obviously are not quite that interested in getting their stomachs, acclimated, but I don't regret the experiences I had. Some of the places that I ate, the doctor regretted it on my behalf, but I wasn't so regretful. I do quote him when he asked me where I had eaten one time when I was sick, and I said, "Oh, I was at such and such a momo shop," which is momo is like a Tibetan dumpling. It's like a soft, boiled noodles with meat inside. And he knew the restaurant, and he said, "Have you been in their kitchen?" I was like, "Well, no." And he's like, "Next time you go, peek in the kitchen, and then you will never go again." So he was very patient with me, shall we say. And I was also young, and I probably wouldn't do all of that again, but I don't regret the experience.
That's the joy of being young. We do a lot of dumb things, and now we don't have to do them when we're older.
Yes, very true.
So let's fast forward a bit. So solo travel, came into your life in, late teens, early 20s.
Yes.
And how did it continue to be a part of your life?
I traveled to Nepal 3 separate times, actually, solo. And so I lived there for a total of 7.5 months. And the last trip was when I was, I think, 22 or 23. And then, my life moved on. I did other things. I did travel to teach English in China after that. I was with a group, but I was mostly responsible for myself while I was there. So while I did have travel companions on the flight, there was a lot of a sense in which I was, in a sense, living there and kind of living a life as a single person, in that country. Honestly, after that point, I was dating, I got married, I did some travel with my husband, but professionally, we weren't in the same industries. So a lot of my travel, I traveled to Los Angeles several times when I was studying screenwriting, was in a program out there, some fun experiences doing that. And I did travel solo on those trips, also to speak at conferences. And then I think one of the most notable solo travel trips from recent years was a trip that my last corporate employer actually sent me on to Portland, Oregon during Design Week, which is basically about a 10-day period when all the agencies, artist shops, studios, all these crazy, amazing creative businesses that are in Portland, because it's kind of a mecca for that sort of a thing, when they basically all open their doors and have workshops and parties, and people come in and speak. Stefan Sagmeister, the designer, was like the keynote speaker that year. And I just got to go and immerse myself in this for like 10 days. And I did that alone. And that was an amazing trip to do alone, because I could literally just be me, the art, the ideas, and the creativity, and soak it in without, this sounds bad, but without having to give any energy to, say, a travel partner. I could just be in the learning experience. And that was really enriching, and it informed a lot of the work I did afterward, and also the business that I later started. So.
Well, that's major though. So I love that as you were talking about these trips, mm-hmm. you were including your business trips, you were including your conferences, because a lot of people discount the fact that in many cases is solo travel.
Absolutely.
So I also like to really encourage people when they can to sort of mix business and pleasure. And if they're going to a city that they've never been to before, to add an extra day, add a little cushion, or to get out and explore. I know those things can be exhausting.
Yes.
But to take that time to go and have dinner by yourself if possible, or go see some landmark in that city that you've never seen, it might take some more energy. I'm going to give that, but it also can give you some energy and some peace and truly some confidence.
Yes, it truly does. And I kind of made that a point, actually, because I did do quite a bit. Until recently, I did quite a bit of business travel. And my goal was always to see at least one site in the city that I went to. And if it was a city I'd been to before, to see something different that I hadn't seen. And I was sometimes would ask a local, I used to work in the events industry, and I had to be in San Diego a couple years back. And so the account executive I was working with was from the area. And so I said, I have an afternoon. I have 4 hours in an afternoon. What is the one thing that I can go see that I shouldn't miss, even though I want to see all of San Diego, but I don't have time? And he said, you need to go out to this little island, and I can't recall the name of it, but it's right off the coast, and you can take a boat out there. And right basically from the edge of the convention center, which is where we were working. So he said, get on the boat and go out there for the afternoon. And I did. And ironically, that was the afternoon that the San Diego airport got shut down because of a shooting, which was 18 months ago or something like that.
Wow.
And I get a phone call from my talent saying, we can't get in, we're stranded, we can't fly in. So I had to come back early from from the island to deal with that situation, and they got there fine, and the show went on. But kind of just funny that happened while I was off enjoying this island. But I don't regret that. That was a fantastic afternoon, and I have a lot of other situations like that where I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I went and saw this or that, landmark or did this or that, locally famous thing. Never regret those experiences. And even if it is exhausting, because you are taking a little extra time out when you are busy and you are focused on other things, even if it's just to go to an amazing restaurant, like you said, that's a memory you will carry with you forever. And that time alone sometimes gives you a time to think about yourself and your life and see things in a different way because you are in a totally different environment. And so your creativity is heightened.
I love it. And the lesson there too about asking a local, like, why wouldn't we?
Yeah, totally.
Like, most people are so proud of their area. They want people to go have a phenomenal time.
Yeah.
So, and if your partner there hadn't been a local, I'd have asked the security guard.
Yep, totally.
Or the waitress at the restaurant. I mean, it's just, let's engage them. And oftentimes they want to brag about their city. Have at it. Tell me what makes this awesome so that I can go check it out for myself.
Yes. Yeah. And you literally, I mean, it can be as simple as grabbing someone on the street and being like, hey, what's the neatest thing, or if you could only see one thing in this town, what would you see? And then whatever comes to their mind at the top of their head, go see that thing. Even if it's random. And sometimes it's not even the famous thing you're going to find in a tour book or online. It might be something that only locals know about. And that makes it even better, makes it more fun. And some of the best restaurants I've eaten at were places that, people said you got to go there, but you're not going to really find it on anyone's
Right.
map.
Well, and that's, in this day and age of the internet, those best kept secrets are hard to come by.
Yes.
And so when you do find them, all those little, I love New York City. And so I don't remember what I just recently saw. I think it was somebody was making ice cream in waffle cones, not like a crispy cone, but a waffle. And they were carving like roses on the top. And I'm like, oh, this is stunning. And they're just making that with the ice cream scoop. And I'm like, yeah, by the time I get back to New York, it's just going to be so passé. But it's wonderful that people discover it. And then all of a sudden it just blows up and goes viral. And then it's not the same anymore.
Exactly. So you have to have your eyes open too, while you're, particularly in a place like New York, to notice things. I kind of have a little story on that note from solo travel. I was in New York for business a couple of years ago, had an evening before the event that was supposed to start the next day, and happened to just see, as I was coming out of the plane, that the Discovery Center in Times Square was having an Avengers exhibition. I happen to love the Avengers. And it was an interactive exhibition. And I was working in the events industry, so technically I could make the argument to my employer that it was useful, and it was useful for what I was working on. But I also really wanted to see it because, let's face it, it's just cool to go and be immersed in this interactive experience. And so I did. I got on the nearest subway, went downtown Friday night, insane. Like, the train was packed, right? Everybody was going to downtown for something. Just kind of followed my Google Maps, told me where to get off. I could get off and I'm in Times Square. I hadn't been there in years. And I'm like totally overwhelmed by all the people. Found my way to the center, saw the exhibition, had an amazing time. I will never forget that night. And it's all because I had no plans that morning when I got up and flew to go see that exhibition. I just got off the plane. There was the sign. And I said, I have to see that by hook or by crook. I got myself down there, and it was a little scary because it's like, okay, I don't really know where I'm going. This is New York. The subways go everywhere. What if I get off in the wrong part of town? Blah, blah, blah. But I just, your brain always gives you those what ifs. And so you just say, thanks for showing up. Appreciate that. But I'm a seasoned traveler. I got this. And go and do it. And you'll never, ever regret those moments, those spontaneous moments.
I agree completely. Well, let's talk about your most recent trip. Your most recent trip has been, I think, of course, our most recent trip we remember the best because it's so close, but there's some other special stuff that's been going on for you. So tell us about what's going on in your trip.
Well, my most recent travel hasn't been solo, so I don't know if that counts or not. But I've been in Colorado and Arizona already this year. But my boyfriend was with me both of those times. My most recent solo travel, believe it or not, has been to Indianapolis, and that was work travel. So I had a contract gig for a little while where I was having to travel to Indianapolis twice, sometimes once a week, or like 2 days per week, every week for a little while, on and off. And it's fascinating because Indianapolis is a city that you don't really, you don't get up every morning and think to yourself, I mean, I'm sure, Indianapolis is a great city, but most of us don't get up every morning and go, hey, Indianapolis, this is like top 10 travel destinations in the US, because it's the Midwest, and it's not even the largest city in the Midwest. But I really grew to enjoy that city a lot over the times that I traveled there, again, alone. So I'm able, when I'm not at work, to go out and kind of explore things, get to know people, talk to Uber drivers, talk to waitresses and waiters about the city. And I mean, that is such a fascinating area. It's poised for growth. Like by some estimates, behind Austin, it's one of the second fastest growing cities in the US for like startups and technology. I mean, there's a lot that's going on inside of this, what most would consider a Rust Belt, city that doesn't necessarily look like a massive metropolis, when you drive in, because you
Sure.
can get in there really easily. But there's some amazing restaurants, amazing museums. Things are, really easy to get around to and see. And I was impressed. Honestly, every time I came away, I was like, wow, there's something else really special and cool there. The people just have this friendliness about them, this Midwestern hospitality. It's different even than how people are in Milwaukee. There are regional differences, regional accent even. And of course, keeping the time zone straight was always challenging for me.
Yes.
They don't follow daylight savings. So.
Oh my gosh. No, I know that can get confusing. And I have found too, like my time in Louisville or my time in Cincinnati, like when you take the time to just see what the city has to offer and appreciate it. So when you go to a city, like I'm an urban traveler. That is my preference. I can do a little hiking. That's not my go-to. So when you go to a city, what is kind of your priority list of things that you're going to check out?
Art museums are high for me because I am an artist. I've always loved art. So art museums are going to be at the top. Oh, that was another thing I saw on a solo trip to Boston. I saw this amazing Fiverr show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Boston. Again, would have never known about it if I just hadn't looked up what's going on at the museums when I got into town to see if I could squeeze something in. So art museums at the top of the list, ethnic restaurants. So anything that might be a little bit less of a common type of cuisine to find in the US, Somalian or Sri Lankan or something like that. That's not like every restaurant on the corner isn't necessarily serving that, and that has high ratings. I look for those. Also, any kind of cultural venue, if there is a performance going on somewhere that I can catch, that works on my time schedule, I'll do a little Googling. Sometimes it's not till the day of when I'm on the plane. Sometimes it's in advance, but I try to find out what's happening and pick something. And
Absolutely.
I just rely on luck, like that time in New York when I got off the plane. I'm like, that's what I'm doing tonight. I'm going to go see the Avengers exhibition. But I do try to be, most of the time, a little bit more systematic about it. And it just involves Googling. And the cultural venues and cuisine are at the top of my list.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and so what I'm loving to hear, though, is this, how things just appear when you're out and you're open to them. Even if you had been a bit more planful with some of that stuff, that doesn't often mean that you're fully locked into it.
Yes.
For me, when I go to New York, I have a list of things that I want to try to do at some point in that trip.
Mm-hmm.
And then I leave myself open to how that's going to flow based on how I feel that day. Like I really make sure that I'm honoring that time for whatever it is that I need as well.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny you should say that about honoring your time and honoring yourself. And I think solo travel allows you to do that. I'm a little bit more introspective, so I enjoy having time where I can literally retreat into myself a little bit and just think. But there is nothing more beautiful than sitting in, like I'm thinking of an afternoon, this is another trip to New York, where I stayed not in the Chinatown that's famous, but in Flushing, New York, which is the other Chinatown, which is a little bit more of like, the regular folks Chinatown, not the tourist Chinatown.
Got it.
And I stayed in this hotel, owned by by a family from Hong Kong. And of course, all the food that they served was fixed by them. And, it was made in this little restaurant that was in the basement of the hotel. And I just remember sitting down there and watching this way of life happen around me that was very much infused with a culture that's very different from the one I grew up with. Walking out my door, and there's a shop that sells all kinds of teas and herbal remedies, very similar to what I saw when I was in China. Or like walking around trying to find a restaurant that takes credit card in that town, which that's a whole other story. But I ended up finally finding a place that served Peking duck, which is my favorite Chinese dish, and took credit card. So that was a win. But it was like a little adventure making that happen. But the process of just being able to observe and ponder and let my mind go where it wants to go and be in this environment that is just so different than mine, I find that refreshing. Like I actually need that. I just need to be away and not be needed really by anyone for anything. And I think that's part of, particularly with business travel, I get energetically drained. You know, I'm empathic and intuitive, so I get energetically drained by a lot of people time. And so the going out and walking the streets, seeing what's around the next corner, going to the museum is a way for me to check out from interaction, but engage with the environment in a way that I find, it, just enables me to fill my cup back up in some senses, and enables me to be more productive and be inspired when I come back, even if the trip was for someone else's project, or purpose, like in the case of a business trip.
Absolutely. And one of the things that when you're talking about going out and just kind of walking, and to me, that is a sense of adventure and exploration that, when you're at home, you just kind of live in your comfort zone. And while there are a lot of great ways to travel solo in your own backyard, we don't always do it. And so if we're already traveling, then we almost like have the ability to give ourselves permission,
yes,
to check other things out in a way that we wouldn't have before. So one of the things that we've talked about is the fact that, solo travel is important to you, and you've had it as part of your life for a long time.
yes,
And that it's something that you value even when you're in a relationship. And a lot of women that I talk about are like, well, I'm married, so I can't travel solo. And I'm like, okay, I've started naming some of my podcasts, Married Women Can Travel Solo Too. And maybe I should write like a self-help book on that topic. But tell me your philosophy about this. How has it worked when you're in a relationship, for you, for your partner?
Yeah, solo travel, I think is really important, no matter whether you're in a close relationship with another, human being in that way or not. And I think it's because if I've learned anything over the last few years, I've come to realize that you can only bring to a relationship who you are as a person, and what you have in terms of your own experiences, and how you're taking care of your own self as a person. And travel is a huge way to do that. Now, I love traveling with my boyfriend. It's a lot of fun. He's even more adventurous traveler than me. He's much more extroverted than I am, so it brings that out. But I love equally, the business trip where I do go see a museum, and then I have something to send him pictures of and talk about when I come back. Or the trip that's more self-discovery, and it's like, I just need to get away and sort some things out for me. I come back as a more refreshed, better, more able to be present person. And I hope, that's my goal anyway, to give back in the relationship more because of that. So finding that balance is really critical. And as an introvert, I kind of need alone time. So the thought of traveling solo doesn't like I continue to need that, maybe more than an extroverted type person might notice that they also need it. Although I think everyone benefits from it, whether you feel that perceived need for it or not. So it's just a part of being a healthy human being. And as a woman today, we have the option to travel. 100 years ago, women didn't travel unescorted, hardly ever. It was,
right.
It was looked upon. And I realize we don't live in that world. That's not our reality. But I do think about that frequently, that even for my mother or my grandmother, that was seen as a much bigger deal even than it is today. And I cherish that freedom. And I think part of cherishing it is honoring it by taking advantage of that, and then saying, what can I bring from this back into my relationship? What can I share? How can this contribute to us? And I would encourage him to do the same to travel, and if there's something that he wants to do or see, and I can't go along for whatever reason, go do that thing, go enjoy it, and come back and bring those stories with you.
Absolutely. It really does. It helps whole person,
yes,
processing, healing, and all of that. And, as I am midlife at this point, one of the things that I've realized is I can either take charge and shape what's coming next for me, or I can let the world shape it for me. And Amen. I find that the ability to step away from my standard operating procedure, the people I take care of, all the place I take care of, and stop looking at all of those other things that I'm responsible for and just spend some time with me, allows me to get that space and clarity to make choices about how I want to shape my next steps for my future.
Yes.
And I'm single, and so a lot of people, again, they think, okay, well, you can do that. You're single. But more and more I hear women in committed relationships or married relationships, and they're like, if I didn't do this, I would be a hot mess at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I had recently interviewed someone who, she would do her road trips at spring break as a teacher, and she'd just go drive and she'd pick a direction. And I'm like, you don't have to go far. You don't have to spend a ton of money. You were able to really leverage business trips. So it wasn't even a lot of extra money out of your pocket.
Yes, that's correct. And it's great. It's a great way to do it.
Agreed. Like to add an extra night in a hotel or things like that, it's not that costly. Especially if that's just, when I go to conferences, it is, especially if I'm speaking, I make sure I add a day before so I can be fully present and I'm not scrambling. And I add at least one day after, partly for the sake of being able to conclude any follow-up.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me to package up that event is, has passed, it's done, reflect on it, and breathe before I go home and dive back into whatever's waiting for me at home.
I love that. That's a really great process to have. And I haven't always taken that extra time, but when I have, I've always felt so much better and the experience has been less rushed. That's a wonderful practice. I love that. And even the idea of being able to conclude that follow-up on the day after you need to is super valuable.
Well, so what's been interesting about this conversation today, Lisa, is that we're both entrepreneurs and we both come from, some different backgrounds where we've had to do some travel for corporate and things like that. I have really been talking to a lot of women who travel for business, and they haven't created a priority around that time for self-care that is probably necessary. And it just makes me think there's probably an additional conversation to be had with, women who travel for business and how they can build in solo travel as a part of their routine for self-care for both their business and their lives.
Yes, absolutely. And self-care, like you hit on that point, is really huge. I'm a big believer in that. When I don't do it, my business and my life suffers. And when I'm traveling for corporate, my work suffers. And I think because, like I mentioned, I know that as an empath, I am very intuitive. I know that I suck up a lot of the energy around me. It's literally a self-defense mechanism. Like it is how I survive a lot of times. But it's so needed. And there are ways to build it into your travel and to sort of, use that. I mean, even in December, I took a trip to Indianapolis, one of these trips, and was able to attend a business retreat in South Carolina on the beach, which was amazing, which happened like the 2 days after that. And so I literally flew to Indianapolis, did what I needed to do there, flew from Indianapolis to South Carolina, which made some of the ticket arrangements a lot simpler, and was able to then take that time for self-care those couple of days. And it was kind of nice because I had this great interaction with my client, and then boom, I went into this mode of reflection and really working on the business. And it was just a beautiful experience all around. Like that was just a beautiful couple of days. But it takes some planning, it takes some intention to create that, and especially on a business trip, to be like, okay, I need this time for me, and I'm not obligated to be anywhere with anyone else. This is going to be self-care. This is going to be time for me to go out and explore and refresh myself as a person. It's a habit like anything else. You kind of have to build it up and exercise it.
Absolutely. Well, and honestly, that's a brilliant technique, is then to say, okay, well, I'm going to be going in and out of this city for a while. Where do they fly to frequently and cheap and direct? And
yep.
Oh, I'm totally going to use that one. Well, I mean, really, like, especially we're both based in Wisconsin. So the weather here, although it's perfect right now, the weather here is not always stunning. And to be able to transport yourself as incentive or a reward for, a job well done, it creates that space in our brains to allow us to come back refreshed.
It does. And actually, now that you say that, one of the things I've been thinking about is the fact that January and February are my least busy months of the year in the work that I do. And consistently, this is my third January, February, and they've been the same every single year. And then it gets really busy in March and going on for the rest of the year. So this year I scheduled, a trip to my dad's in Arizona, which my boyfriend joined me for part of that.
Sure.
Trip. for 10 days in January. And it was wonderful. I got sunshine. I got out of one of the darkest, coldest periods of the year here.
Yep.
And that was only 10 days. And I'm already, that was my first trail run. Like, okay, do I like this traveling during the down season thing? Next year, it's going to be a lot longer, and it'll be maybe a couple different places, or something like that. But like, why not?
Yes.
If you know a down period or you have a season that's not as busy, you can plan for your business and build new products and do things not here, wherever here is for you.
Yes.
Especially if it's cold and dark. Go somewhere where you get some sun and be productive.
Well, right. And, there's no reason not to. And it's not necessarily that expensive to do it.
Yes.
There's so many ways that we can, I just, like, the first thing you need to do is think that it could be possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have to believe that first.
And then it can be. It really just makes me giggle that it can be very possible. I've taken off a couple months. In the last couple of years, I've taken January off, and I've done some travel as well. And the world goes on. Like, I can stay caught up with the work because my workload slows down during that time as well. I can stay caught up virtually, and I can still explore. And man, when I come back, it's so much better. That's awesome.
Yeah, you are just ready to hit the ground running when you get back.
Exactly. Well, tell us a little bit about your business, Lisa. It's that time in the program where I want to hear a little bit about what you do, share with people how they can find you, things like that.
Sure. Well, I am a writer, storyteller, and client attraction coach. So I work mostly with two women who are in two different stages of their business life. The first group are women who have multiple streams of income. They may even have multiple businesses, or they might have a job and then a cause or a project that they're promoting. And so a couple different identities. And they're having trouble telling a simple, coherent, single story to their clients and to their collaborators about who they are and what they do. So helping those women find their one story and then tell that consistently throughout their brand and their marketing is part of what I do. The other side is, women who've been in business a while and they're ready to step out onto the stage, so to speak, and really have a platform and go out for those bigger PR and marketing opportunities, start getting the speaking engagements, but they've been having trouble getting traction with their message because it's not sticky enough yet for them to really get that attention. I help them find the juicy story inside of what they've been doing and create that stickiness that's going to help them really build that platform. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of writing, a lot of listening, and a lot of helping people, have those aha moments about what's happened in their lives that makes them who they are and that makes what they bring to their clients different than everyone else, and taking that out into the world. And it's really exciting to watch people speak their truth and to step up into their voice.
That's an amazing service you provide, Lisa. And man, living in the entrepreneurial space, I know there's so many people who need it.
Yes, indeed.
That's awesome. So how can people find you? We're going to put some of this in the show notes so they can connect with you, but how can people find you?
The best way is my website, which is heroshift.com. That's HEROSHIFT.com. And then also I'm on Facebook as Lisa England LLC. Fun fact, I changed my name so much when I first started my business, writer always trying to get it right, that I now no longer have privileges to change my Facebook, business page name again. So that's the reason why it doesn't match heroshift.com. But the HeroShift is actually one of the programs, my signature program, hence the name of the website. But those are two good ways. And then of course, Lisa@heroshift.com is my best email if you just want to reach out that way as well.
Wonderful. Well, we'll make sure that those go in the show notes as well, but that makes me giggle. Okay, so you kept trying to edit the name and all of a sudden that's it.
Yeah, no more. You're done. You've edited it enough. We hope you're happy with that last one. I pretty much got an email that way, so yeah.
I'm very glad that it was Lisa England LLC, because that can go forever.
Yes, it can. It really can. And another fun fact, my lisaengland.com is also me, if anybody looks that up, but I'm shipping everything over to HeroShift. So if anybody who really wants to do the full Google search will find both of those. But if you contact me through either site, it will come to me, and those will be merged very shortly. So.
Very good. Lisa, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I really appreciate you sharing your stories. And I think we've done a lot to encourage some business travelers as well as solo travelers who are in relationships.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Go forth and travel and be an amazing person in your relationship while traveling solo also.
I love it. Thanks again, Lisa.
Thank you too.
Wasn't it great to hear the stories that Lisa shared with us today? It's important to remember that you can still travel solo when you're in a relationship, and taking a little bit of extra time for self-care before and after business trips can do a lot for you, both business and professional. Make sure to take that time for self-care. It's really important. Well, sisters, we've reached the end of today's episode, but the conversation doesn't have to end there. Go to www.transformviatravel.com to join the Go Solo Sisterhood Facebook community and share your thoughts. If you've liked what you've heard, please invite your friends to listen to Go Solo Live. And if you want to be a guest, please reach out to me directly at jennifer@transformviatravel.com. Until next time, remember, go solo, not alone.